اللهم صل على محمد
وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أفضل الذكر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله وعلى ابن عمك أمير المؤمنين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا أبا محمد أيها الحسن الزكي الناصح الأمين وعلى أخيك أبي عبد الله الحسين. ما خاب من تمسك بكم وأمن من لجأ إليكم. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا أن تصيبوا قوما بجهالة فتصبحوا على ما فعلتم نادمين. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
The chapters that discuss the area regarding the misconceptions about Imam al-Hassan span volumes, archives, and libraries, quite unfortunately. For Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, from among his family, the predecessors and those who came after him from the Ahlul Bayt, he is the #1 victim of identity ambush, of being a bullseye for misconceptions, conspiracy theories, allegations, tuham, lies, and the list goes on. Society worked through thick and thin to make sure that the image and character of Imam al-Hassan was brought down for a number of reasons. Imam al-Mujtaba alayhi salam, from his descendants, the majority of all uprisings came from the Hassaniyin or the Hassaniyun, those who claimed descendantry from Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. They constantly rose to overthrow the establishments. One doesn't need to look further than Muhammad al-Nafs al-Zakiyya. We'll discuss him inshallah tomorrow. One doesn't need to look further than Abdullah, the son of Hassan al-Muthanna. One doesn't need to look further than Hussein and his sister Zainab. Oh no, not Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, but Hussein al-Hassani during the event known as Waqi'atul Fakh, as we all understand it during the time of Imam al-Jawad al-Rida alayhi salam. All of these Hassani Sayyids, in reality they are Sada. And I know that today many Muslims from the lineage of Rasulullah claim that lineage because they are Hassani. We might even have some here today. The king of Morocco is a Hassani Sayyid. There are many. The lineage of Imam al-Hassan is plentiful. Of course, it is trumped by the lineage of Imam al-Hussein through either Imam Zain al-Abidin or Zayd, or even from Imam al-Hussein to the rest of the Ahlul Bayt, whether they are Musawi and so forth. But that doesn't mean that the lineage of Imam al-Hassan did not live on. This lineage spent a lot of time revolting against the establishment. How would the establishment reply back? By lowering the patriarchy of that lineage. So Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, they would make accusations against him. This, coupled with the fact that Imam al-Mujtaba relinquished political authority, made it very easy for people to make up lies. And until today, we see the effects of these lies, brothers and sisters. Lies from the lay individual. I've seen Shia today acknowledge that Imam Hassan is not brave. That's very much a tragedy. And even from the scholarly level, whether it is material that is reported from the non-Shia or even within our own Shia corpus, we might notice ahadith that tend to lay forth a condescending view of Imam al-Mujtaba alayhi salam. We will give a brief summary examination as to what are the 4 or 5 major misconceptions and their responses, and reflect, do I hold any of these regarding my Imam? Some of them, many people didn't know they exist, but millennia came and people were born and died really believing in these claims. Let us examine that inshallah ta'ala. There was an Orientalist by the name of Dwight M. Donaldson. He was born in the late 19th century, and he died in the mid-20th century, specifically 1976. An Orientalist, or we describe them as al-mustashriqun, these individuals, they went to the Middle East in a period, by the way, of Orientalism, and they went and studied the way of life of the backward Bedouin Arab. That was really pretty much their mindset. And so they tried to take from their knowledge and disseminate it into the think tank hubs of the universities that were around at that time, particularly University of Oxford. And this doesn't mean this is an outright attack on that university, but professors, in order to hold more merit, they showed their Arabic study. And so some would go and travel to the Middle East and learn about the religions and way of lives. Dwight Donaldson went to Iraq particularly, went to Pakistan, went to other areas, and he saw that there is a great deal of focus in the Shia world on their figures known as the Imams. He wrote a book called The Shiite Religion. Already, this presupposes that Shi'ism in of itself is a religion. But it takes a man from the West to come and teach us about our own aqidah and theology, unfortunately, and sadly. So he writes in this book, The Shiite Religion, that something I noticed between the theology of both Shia and Sunni is that Ali ibn Abi Talib, a non-Muslim man, let's not forget this, a professor worth his credit academically, but not necessarily truthfully. Ali ibn Abi Talib had a sour relationship with his son Al-Hassan al-Sibt al-Mujtaba. The relationship between Imam al-Hassan and Imam Ali wasn't the most fruitful, wasn't flowery, it was not nice, it looked really bad. And he begins to list, by the way, he lists ahadith. Some of these ahadith, you can find them in material from our own end. Others you can find, well, the vast majority from the non-Shia. But how do we address these? Because if the non-Muslim academic world is leveling accusations and writing dissertations presenting that Ahlul Bayt, they're not what you really think they are. You propose them to be superheroes. Ali ibn Abi Talib didn't really like his son Al-Hassan, and Al-Hassan didn't like Ali ibn Abi Talib. He gives descriptions where you see one time Imam Hassan arguing with his dad, and he's saying, "Father, you made a bad decision here. Muawiyah, you should not fulfill the arbitration when he said, let's not fight, let's use the Quran to judge us. You shouldn't have done that. What you don't know he's a zalim, fight him." Imam Ali has to rebuke him. And then we see Imam Ali questioning Imam Al-Hassan's judgment and character. Do not marry him. فَإِنَّهُ مِطْلَاقٌ ذَوَّاقٌ لَا تَنْكِحُ الْحَسَنِ. People, women of the Muslim world, don't marry Al-Hassan. The accusation that we all will address inshallah and examine, that Imam Al-Hassan was an individual that was rampant with marriage. He would marry, and many would imagine, we hope it was marriage, it was divorces. From how much he married and divorced, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib had to stand and say, Ya ayyuhan nas. If you look at the wording, is even more indicative of this condensating tone, of the condemning nature. Ayyuhan nas, people, not even ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, just people, stop marrying him. And so he's like, look, see this? These are indicative of Imam Ali and his son not having the most close relationship. And so he's trying to paint this image that the Ahlul Bayt are just like you and I, and here are things I've discovered. These are accusations that are leveled against Imam al-Mujtaba from even the academic Western world. Let's open the world of the Turath al-Islami, the Islamic heritage, and you see the vitriol and venom that is leveled against Imam al-Mujtaba. It is absolutely sad. No Imam got more attack than Imam al-Mujtaba salawatullahi alayh. Let us examine that claim, that Imam Ali had a poor relationship with Imam al-Hassan. Utter nonsense, preposterous to the highest degree. If ever there was a relationship that can be deemed the most beautiful between father and son, it is Ali and Hassan. Imam Ali alayhi salam looks at Imam al-Hassan one day and he just gazes upon him. And Imam Hassan looks back at him and Imam Ali begins to say the following line. He says, Bunay, already the language is beautiful. Bunay, my beloved son, wajadtuka ba'dhi, bal wajadtuka kulli. حتى لو كأن شيئا أصابك أصابني. My beloved son, I see you as part of me. Rather, I see you as my entire self. And if something was to harm you, it would have harmed me. Mentally, emotionally, and physically. From how much Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen loved Imam al-Hassan, he would say, I am able to speak. I want you to climb the minbar وَتَخْطُبْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ, and give sermons. I'm not interested to speak today, which wasn't something we always found as a norm. When you have an imam, typically the imam would speak. Rasulullah, you never saw a single sermon from Imam Ali while Rasulullah was alive. Until Rasulullah died, Imam Ali began preaching. But why would you speak in the presence of your teacher unless your teacher gives you permission? And so Imam Hassan, we see Imam Ali saying, no, speak on my behalf. So he would go up and lecture, he would then come down, then he would say the following, ذُرِّيَّةً بَعْضُهَا مِنْ بَعْضٍ. What a family, one resembles the other. From how much he sees himself in his boy, Imam al-Mujtaba salawatullahi alayh. Then you would see the Holy Prophet address Imam al-Hassan in this manner, and he says, Wallah, no one resembles me, khalqan wa khuliqan wa mantiqa, more than you, Habibi Hassan. Now when he says this, no one resembles me more in personality, in physical character, and in vision and logic, that is indicative that Imam Ali agrees with that, unless you're trying to say Imam Ali disagrees with Rasulullah, aka his nafs. All of this we level and say, you brought one sad example from your own ijtihad. Last I checked, I don't do a taqleed of a mujtahid who's non-Muslim. And then you try to make these claims. We refute back by saying your claims are bogus and they fall short. But how about when he starts referencing ahadith? That gives us an area to ponder about. Because among the ahadith, which later became brothers and sisters, and I see that I don't know where and when this hadith will stop, but it became something so profound in the identity of Imam al-Hassan, many people today actually believe it might be the reality from how much we hear it. And this is with respect to the amount of times Imam al-Mujtaba got divorced. Now, just a disclaimer. There is no aib, there is no shame in getting a divorce. In this religion, do not make anything despised that is halal. Allah has made halal. Do not make anything reprehensible that Allah has allowed. There's no aib in getting a divorce. What do you mean that? What's so reprehensible about divorcing someone you found to be not befitting of a spouse? That's one observation. Even if, and I know this might come across as rather bizarre, even if the numbers were a bizarre amount. Let's say if the person got married and divorced over 10 times. Why is that aib? Why does that have to reflect on the individual? It could have just mean that they, no matter who they found in the society, that society has really poor people. Yes, it could be indicative that maybe you should choose wiser people, make smarter decisions. That's fine. If you're talking about a normal person, let alone an imam of Ahlul Bayt. However, that has to be made clear from the outset. There's no aib in getting divorced. But still, I want to know the haqq. When I see some of the allegations leveled against Imam al-Hassan al-Mujtaba, I have to ask, I want to know my imam. Because when I go to Baqi', one of the ziyarah, yesterday the poet was so beautiful, that we send our salams to Baqi'. The ziyarah of al-Baqi' is, Assalamu alaykum ya a'immat al-huda, a'immat al-Baqi', inni ataytukum arifan bihaqqikum. I come to you knowing your reality. Zen, I want to know my imam. Did he go through this process or no? I just want to know. What a sad society it must be that it was deemed necessary to get divorced by Imam al-Hassan. Not that the imam was sad to have divorced such a society. You can't make a marriage successful with Imam al-Mujtaba. I'm not going to blame my imam, because he is from those God has said, literally, مِنَ الَّذِينَ أَذْهَبَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمُ الرِّجْسَ وَطَهَّرَهُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. In that situation, why am I going to blame my imam? Last I checked, I believe in the Quran. You can go ahead and believe in hadith, but the day the hadith contradicts the Quran, which one are you going to prioritize? Even if you give me a hadith, the mother of all hadith, sahihat as-sanad, mutawatira, kadhahabi wal-fidda. It's like, know before, you've never seen a hadith more accurate. The second it has a breath that contradicts the Quran, I throw it against the wall. I don't really care. I don't really care. Let the whole world narrate something. And we see this phenomenon present today, by the way. How do you do wudu? Wudu is supposed to be the most basic. But wudu. Before you argue about Imam Hassan and aqa'id and theology, how about you argue about your method of wudu? Wudu, if God didn't make it so easy to understand of the Holy Quran, that must mean we have a problem comprehending basic elementary knowledge. Allah said very clearly, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, إِذَا قِمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. O you who believe, if you stand for prayer, then wash your face, collect water, wash that face. Then wash your hand until the elbow. And wipe the top of your head. No more getting water, so no more washing. Wipe with the whatever water you have, the top of your head. And wipe the bottom of your feet until that ankle area. Then, the Quran was so simple. Masih. What's 3/4 of the Muslim world doing? Ghasl. They say, because they wash. If you see some people, they open the fountain and they put their foot into it and then they wash. They're like, why did you do that? They say, I have a hadith. Narrated by Abu Fulan, Ibn Fulan, and whatever Fulan, Millan. And all these ahadith, mutawatira wa sahiha. Then the hadith contradict the Quran. If your hadith contradicts the Quran, which one are you going to prioritize? I will prioritize the hadith. Then what's the Quran doing in your life in that situation? The hadith became, before you read a hadith, read Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And then when you finish, say Sadaqallahu al-Aliyul, that rawi, that narrator. Aliyul whatever, I'm not even going to mention the names, you all can fill in the blanks here. If a hadith contradicts the Quran, to heck with the hadith. They say we have 1,000. Now, the hadith that talks about Imam al-Hassan being this kind of individual that married and divorced, in our material are two. Just two. Just two ahadith. In the non-Shia material, 2,000. It's plentiful. That's an exaggeration, by the way. I am to say that the ahadith are plentiful. You can find them in any material. Tariq Dimashq. You can find them in the Sihah. You can find them in the Majami'. You can find them in the Shuruh, in the expositions. You can find them anywhere. In our sources, you can find them. I don't care about the non-Shi'i compendium and works of narrations. I don't care about that right now because I'm not that madhab. I acquire my way of life through the Quran and the Sunnah through the Prophet and his family. Not through the Prophet and his companions that might err sometimes, but the upright companions most definitely. In that situation, what do I see in my material? I concern myself. I do see a hadith. I have to admit. I can't be in denial. This is not the world of insaf and academia. You have to be a legitimate researcher here. Don't deny. The hadith can be found in the Usul of Kafi. Now, it's not a simple book. This is Al-Kafi Sharif by a man known as Thiqatul Islam, the most reliable individual in his area with respect to concerning matters of religiosity, Al-Kulayni. He compiled Al-Kafi, 9 volumes, in the Usul of Kafi, 2 ahadith. Both of them refer back to Imam Ali, standing on the pulpit and saying the following announcement. One of them starts like this. Oh ya ayyuhan nas, la tuzawwiju al-Hasan, fa-innahu mitlaq. Oh people, man and womankind, don't marry al-Hasan, for he will always get a divorce. The hadith continues, a man, we don't know who the man necessarily is, we don't have much detail, stands up and replies back to Imam Ali. He says, Ya Ali, fa wallah, by Allah, we will marry him. We will have our women and daughters marry him. For he is the son of Rasulullah. And he's the son of Fatima al-Zahra. So it's an honor for us. And if he decides to get a divorce, فَإِنْ أَرَادَ مَسَكْ, if he decides to hold on to the marriage, then so be it. And if he doesn't, that's totally fine. At the end of the day, we became family. Even if there's a divorce. In Islamic fiqh, that's how it works. If you marry into a family, it will be haram for your children, even if you got a divorce, to marry from the person you divorced or their family going back up. So their paternal family and so on and so forth. Just because of a marriage that lasted 1 minute, 2 hours, 2 days, you are forever connected familially in a way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts, even if there's a divorce. So they want to have that intisab, that sharaf, that you know we are kind of descendants of the family of the Holy Prophet of Islam. How do we examine this? We don't necessarily come forth and examine it. We have to ask, how did our ulama examine this? One of the most reliable, not reliable necessarily, but most useful, because reliability is contingent and relative on who the scholar is. They might see it reliable, I might differ. But one of the most useful material that examines the ahadith within Al-Kafi Al-Sharif is the work by, we all know the man, Al-Allam Al-Majlisi, the compiler of Bihar Al-Anwar, 114 volumes of material, hundreds of thousands of narrations. Not in Bihar, he has another work. This work is rarely studied, and I don't know why. Because Bihar is literally what it is a sea of narrations. And people like to study it, mashallah, because there are beautiful traditions there. But he has another work. He uses this work to find the sahih ahadith, in his humble opinion, in Al-Kafi Al-Sharif. So he retrospects. He looks at it, and this work is called مرآة العقول في شرح أخبار آل الرسول. مرآة العقول, and Allama al-Majlisi works, he looks at every single hadith in Al-Kafi. And he examines, and he literally writes, after he presents the hadith, whether it is a hadith with discrepancies, whether it is marfu'a, in the sense where there's a block, or there's a gap in the sanad, and it's sahih, or it's weak, or it's negligible. In Mir'at al-Uqul, the hadith that says لا تزوج الحسن فإنه مطلاق, Al-Allama al-Majlisi writes underneath it majhul. That this is something I'm not too aware of. In the sense of the narrators, I have a lack of knowledge. We can't call it sahih, we can't call it da'if, we can't even use it because it's majhul. I don't know. I plead the fifth. This one, majhul from the term jahl. There's the lack of information. Jahl just means lack of information. We can't fulfill this one. The second hadith is also found right after this one. But it doesn't go, لا تزوج الحسن, it goes, لا تنكح الحسن. Do not do the aqd of nikah, which makes you completely married, with Imam al-Hasan. This one, he says, is not majhul. This one, if we're going strictly narrators, ruwat, in the chain of transmission, these guys, they're reliable. But does that make the hadith automatically reliable? That's not how it works in the study of hadith and the science of hadith. You have to study the matan. The sanad could be accurate, but you have to study the context. Why did we suddenly throw away this concept of, look, study the bloody context? Does it contradict the Quran? Because this hadith is from the ahadith al-ahad. It's one hadith. It's not even mutawatira in our material. One hadith is majhul, there's a lack of information, so you can't build anything on jahl. The other hadith, he says, look, it's reliable. Don't marry al-Hasan using the word nikah. Don't marry al-Hasan, that's reliable. But the matan, the context, contradicts everything we know about the status of Ahlul Bayt. Because, here's something else. That if Imam al-Hasan the term was mitlaq, kathir al-talaq, he always divorces. The same chapter, it's the chapter of talaq, by the way, in Al-Kafi. The same chapter, about 5 ahadith before this, in the order. 5 ahadith before, he narrates a hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, to which he says that the most despised, akrahul halal, the most despised halal act in this world, in the eyes of Allah, is al-talaq. Karahiyya shadida, meaning makruh. Now, we have mutawatir ahadith. Mutawatir means in plenty. That talk about how the Ahlul Bayt, it is haram for them to do a makruh. And it is wajib for them to do the mustahab. Otherwise, if they don't do Salat al-Layl, why would I bother doing Salat al-Layl? You're telling me do Salat al-Layl? You missed it. I'm not going to do Salat al-Layl then. You're telling me don't forget the tasbihat. Why would I do it if you don't do it? So that means the mustahab is wajib for them. The makruh is haram. Tell me to avoid makruh, yeah, you're doing makruh. So they have to be the example. They definitely do. In this situation, we have a lot of ahadith, in the hundreds, about the aqidah of the school of Ahlul Bayt and the 12 Imams of Ahlul Bayt that say they can never do the makruh. طيب, in the same Al-Kafi, 5 ahadith before it says لا تنكح الحسن, Imam al-Sadiq says أبغض الحلال الطلاق. The most despised halal is talaq. Would Imam al-Hasan do something makruh unless you say he's not a ma'soom? This contradicts a plentiful, one tradition that is semi-reliable, contradicts hundreds that are sahihat al-isnad wa mutawatira. Why did we take this one and seem to forget the other ones that describe Ahlul Bayt being examples for us? Now, in the sense of what? If you decided to do divorce because of your dhawq. Dhawq meaning your taste. I married but not my type, I decide to divorce. That's not a proper way to divorce. Because the hadith says Allah hates the mitlaqu dhawaq. Yani ala dhawqak. You know how we sometimes say, kullak zo', like that? Is that how it goes? Ahmed, help me. Kullak zo'. I mean, I hear some people say dhawq zo'. But that means it's your taste. MashaAllah, kullak zo', like you wear something really nice, or you prepared some really good dish and you cooked it and you're like, man, kullak zo', you have very good flavor, good taste. You are filled with class, mashallah. So we're the dha, za, it's okay right now. I don't want to get tantrum. In any case, or could we get some security? In any case, that this was a preference. He gets married and he prefers to divorce. Imam al-Hassan doesn't marry, then later on says, you're not my type, and he divorces. Because if we decided for 1 second to accept this narration, we have to accept why he got married and how many times he got married. And where do I begin with the amount of times Imam Mujtaba got married if I accepted this hadith? The smallest amount of times from the accusations, not from the reality. We'll look at the reality, brothers and sisters. But the littlest amount of times Imam Hassan got married and divorced from the opposition end, they say is 20 times. 20 times. That's the least. Do you know how far it gets? It gets to about 300 times. Abu Talib al-Makki, in his Qut al-Qulub, he was a 10th century scholar. And Abu Talib al-Makki, by the way, is a huge influence on the Sufi world. And he is very well respected. Sheikh Habib ibn Umar from Yemen, one of the most renowned scholars from the Sufi Sunni world today. Sheikh Habib ibn Umar, really profound scholar in their worldview. Mu'asir, he's a contemporary scholar. He describes it as one of the most reliable material after a Sahihain. Qut al-Qulub, the kernel of the heart, basically, if I think I may have translated that properly. In it, it's written by a man by the name of Abu Talib al-Makki. He was around in the 9th century, so 900 and mid-900 AD. He writes in the book that when Al-Hasan ibn Ali died, 300 women came out, latimat, hitting their heads like this. So he was married 300 times. Is that how we determine how a man got married? How many women go out? There was a alim, he died in 1989 in Tehran, rahmatullah alayh. You know how many people attended his funeral? How many people attended his funeral? Huh? Guess, wild guess. Over 40 million people. So if that's the logic we're going to use, then we're in trouble over here. That's pretty petty, by the way. 300 women started hitting their heads. Well, that's the least they can do. When an imam dies, it's a tragedy. But why did you all subscribe them all to be his spouses? Why? How much Banu al-Abbas worked their socks off? That must have been because we all heard that Imam al-Hassan is what? Mitlaqun dhawaq. We reject this narration. Now this gets us to a point. Why would a man known as Thiqatul Islam, the most reliable of Islam, Al-Shaykh al-Kulayni, Quddus Sirruh, our most profound of ulama, mashallah, include this hadith? Al-Shaykh al-Kulayni, it's his wajib, it's his obligation, it's his taklif al-shar'i, to record the ahadith associated to the Ahlul Bayt because he is a muhaddith. Hadith, not a faqih. He's not a faqih in this area. He has other works of faqaha. But in this book, the Al-Kafi, it's supposed to be a book of compiling ahadith that he deemed are acceptable to include through the chain, not necessarily through the matan. There's a difference. Content and chain. Al-Shaykh al-Kulayni says, I don't care what the content is. If my teacher said I heard from this teacher, from that guy, and this ends up to any of the Imams of it, I'm going to include it. Even if it's a singular ahadith, ahad, it's my wajib. Well, I'm not going to include it. I have to include it. Why not? Because it'll give us a glimpse as to what happened in history. Why did people say this about Imam al-Hassan? Are we just going to lose that part of history? We won't know the allegations leveled against Imam al-Hassan? Even though it's not true, but I need to know what was said about Imam al-Hassan. So he records it to us. And Shaykh al-Kulayni in other material, he raises Imam al-Hassan's infallibility to a degree where you're like, why would you include this and that? You must have a purpose. And the purpose is my taklif al-shar'i as a muhaddith, a compiler of ahadith, is any hadith where the sanad to me is satisfying, I will include, even if I reject the content. That's why he included it, otherwise we reject it. And so does a Shaykh al-Kulayni. He rejects it, because in other ahadith that describe to us the makruhat, what does it mean when Allah says, Inna Allah, that Allah does what, for example, Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi, and then Rasulullah gets asked, how do we do salawat upon you? Then Rasulullah says that أن تصلوا علي وعلى آلي, and to do your salawat upon me and my family. They said, how? And then he goes and explains all of them. Then they said, who are your family? He then gave the reply, it is me, Hassan, Hussein, Fatima, and Ali ibn Abi Talib. And in our ahadith, the 9 ma'sumin from the family of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. All of that, and we come and accept such an accusation against Imam al-Mujtaba salawatullahi alayhi. This we respectfully put to the side. We proceed. Another allegation, Banu al-Abbas leveled against Imam al-Hassan, and you know, sadly, people were born, died, and believed it all throughout their life, was his physical qualities. Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar is a narrator that is seen as someone who has narrated a lot on the life of Imam al-Hassan. He's a very questionable narrator. Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar, Sayyid al-Khoi, one of our grand scholars, he has a material that discusses the biographies of people that narrate ahadith. When he gets to Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar, he says, I have no idea who this man really is, to be honest with you. There's not much material. I'm not going to call him reliable. Ahlul Sunnah, even they call Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar someone that is not reliable. He made a claim against Imam al-Hassan. He said that كان الحسن ibn Ali عليه الفأفأ في لسانه. Or Imam al-Hassan had a rudda في لسانه. فأفأ or rudda means he stuttered a lot. Again, I don't know where people come up with these accusations and they see them as a shortcoming. Oh well, and divorce is not something to be seen as aib. And a stutter, there's nothing wrong with stuttering in life as a human being. Your dignity is not lowered. What's wrong with that? You know, shame on people that put other people down over cases they couldn't control. But this was their filth and this was their vitriol and hatred against Ahlul Bayt and Al-Muhammad. Banu al-Abbas, they say, you know how you can lower from that man's status? How dare his children revolt against the Khulafa? Come and make claims against their patriarch Al-Hassan. Say he had a stutter. Imam Al-Hassan alayhi salam, I also want to see the reality. Did not have that. Why? Nowhere do we see in the sermons of Imam al-Hassan or in his ihtijajat or his debates that are very firm against a'da of Ahlul Bayt, enemies, did they ever use this against them. They would make lies in front of the Imam's face. We will look at them in a minute, by the way. How the Imam finally meets Muawiyah in Medina. Yazid ibn Muawiyah, he meets him, by the way. Yazid ibn Muawiyah, Amr ibn al-As, Amr ibn Uthman, Utbah ibn Abi Sufyan, and Al-Walid ibn Utbah. He meets all of them, and there's this on-all war of words, and they attack Imam al-Hassan with their words. Never once do they say, and you're the one who has a fa'fa'a or a rudda fi lisanik. They don't use that. Furthermore, it is in our aqeedah, by the way. This doesn't diminish from a person's status if someone sees this within themselves. La abadan. But it's from our aqeedah that the hujjaj of Allah have to be people who are mentally and physically complete. Meaning, mental and physical completion, they cannot have something that acts as an impediment to their risalah. That's all it is. Not that they are lowered in their status. La, get it? It's a very distinct point. They cannot have something about them they cannot change that is an impediment to their risalah. What does that mean? Allah dispatches a prophet to preach to you, yet he has an issue sending you the message because he can't physically do something properly. This is why we reject. You know, in the story of Nabi Lut, Radwanullahi ta'ala alayhi, Nabi Lut, and even Nabi Ayyub, there are many qualities people say that these prophets had that acted as impediments for them to spread their message. So for example, Nabiullah Ayyub, the discussion about Ayyub is that he was ill. The scholars from the non-Shia circle say that he had a stench, and the stench kept people away. We reject this. Why? Because a stench is something that would make people not able to hear the message of Allah. People wouldn't come. But an illness would not. Even if the illness is something that is contagious, people will still come to him, just they won't interact with him directly. He can't have a feature that acts as an impediment. One day, Imam al-Sadiq had a son by the name of Abdullah al-Aftah. Abdullah, many argue he was the oldest of Imam al-Sadiq's son. That's why he is known as Abi Abdullah al-Sadiq. Abdullah al-Aftah. Al-Aftah means the paralyzed. There were people that claimed that Imam al-Sadiq's son, because he is the oldest, many people believe that the next Imam has to be the oldest individual, because he is the oldest, arguably, that must mean he is the Imam. Imam al-Sadiq said, but he is paralyzed. So even your argument falls short. His legs were paralyzed, he couldn't move. Fatahi. And Ibn Bukair was an individual from the companions of the Imams. He was a Fatahi Shi'i. He believed that Ahlul Bayt were 6, and the 7th one is his son Abdullah. In that situation, he can't even walk to you to guide you. So Allah would never bring something in them intrinsically that acts as an impediment. They can get sick. They could die in war. But in the purpose of spreading the message of Islam, they can't have an obstacle. Imam Rida says, regarding the descriptions of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, Al-Imam huwa al-Imam al-Mutahhari an al-dhunub wal-mubre' min al-uyub. Al-Imam huwa al-Imam al-Mutahhar an al-dhunub. He is the person that is pure from sin. You want to know who an Imam is? Because by the time of Imam Rida, so many Imam claimants came out. Waqifa sect, this and that sect, the Asha'ira came out. Imam Rida says, I'll give you a principle. Here's a qa'idah. Here's a principle. You want to know who's an Imam Ma'soom? Al-Mutahhar min al-dhunub, pure, Ma'soom. الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم طاهر مطهر. And what? وَالْمُبْرِئْ عَنِ الْعُيُوبِ, and does not have any physical impediments upon them. They can't be someone that they would struggle to deliver the message to you. The only struggle they should have is from you, not from them. As a result, Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar, when he made this claim, Imam al-Mujtaba, Imam al-Hassan, had a major stutter as if that was going to lower from a man's status or a lady's status if they have a stutter. That doesn't mean anything, but you want the haqq. In our theology, it contradicts the understanding of imamah. In addition, that's not going to work with us, because then we see Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he is known as what? Sayyidul Balagha. And words were written from Nahjul Balagha to others and so on and so forth. He says, I see you as my entire self. And then he sees him preach. Why would the Imam make him preach? And then when he comes down and he says what we just said earlier, ذُرِّيَّةً بَعْضُهَا مِنْ بَعْضٍ subhanallah. A family, one is exactly just like the other. This all is indicative that the Imam never had any of these qualities, brothers and sisters. Another allegation leveled against Imam al-Hassan, Banu al-Abbas, they loved attacking his character. More than Banu Umayyah. Banu Umayyah was going away. Banu Umayyah was withering away. After Sayyid al-Shuhada, Shahada, Banu Umayyah went away. Banu al-Abbas rose. The first of these guys to rise, Al-Mansur, Al-Dewaniqi. He took it upon his life mission to go and remove from the love of Imam al-Hassan in the hearts of the people. And so he would say Imam Hassan is not a man. Imam al-Hassan kana mitlaqun dhawaq. All of these started from him. The man that is responsible for assassinating Imam al-Sadiq, Al-Dewaniqi, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, he made these allegations. He was sick of how many of his descendants of Imam al-Hassan were having revolutions. Specifically, Muhammad dhun Nafs al-Zakiyya, Imam al-Hassan's great-great-grandson. So he's like, you know, I'm going to attack your grandfather. So he made all of these claims against Imam al-Hassan. One of these brothers and sisters is alive today. This one is heavily accepted. We reject it. That I want you to observe the following. It's a very sad reality, honestly. For everyone who believes that the Mahdi is from the line of Imam al-Hassan, they believe and substantiate this because of the following observation. Imam al-Hussein, the reality was, should not have fought Yazid ibn Muawiyah. As a result, he wanted dunya, so Allah had his akhirah be like this, how he was killed with his family. Imam al-Hassan didn't want dunya when dunya came to him. As opposed to Imam al-Hussein, he went to dunya. Going to Kufa to be an emir, you go to dunya. Imam al-Hassan, he had the opportunity to have dunya, he relinquished it and gave it to Muawiyah. As a result, because he didn't have dunya, Allah gave him from his children who will rule the dunya, al-Mahdi. That is the most biggest load of preposterous nonsense to the third degree you have ever seen in your life. Why? Because that is to say that what Imam Hussein did in Karbala was a punishment to him, wal-'iyadhu billah. Anyone who, by the way, it's literally, if you are a Shi'i, you don't believe in this. If you are a non-Shi'i, this is the reality. That the Mahdi will be from the lines of Al-Hassan, and his name is Muhammad bin Abdullah. You know, we don't really disagree with that much, to be very honest with you. We actually don't really disagree with that. Why? Because Al-Imam al-Mahdi, may Allah hasten his reappearance, وَعَجَّلَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى فَرَجَهُ الشَّرِيفِ. Al-Imam al-Mahdi is from the line of Imam al-Hassan. but not from the paternal line of Imam al-Mujtaba, from the maternal line of Imam al-Mujtaba. The non-Shi'i says Imam al-Hassan is the paternal father of Imam al-Mahdi. What does this mean? Imam Hassan, do you know how many children he had? He had 4 sons, 1 daughter. Another observation, if you're saying he married 300 women, how come he only has 5 kids? A man that marries 300 women, how come he only has 5 kids? Back then, the circumstances were very difficult to avoid having a child. So if he actually, let's just use the bare small number, 20 marriages, 20 divorces, only 5 children. 4 boys, 1 girl. If you look at the children, by the way, Zayd bin Ali, Zayd bin Hassan, Abdullah ibn al-Hassan, who was shaheed in Karbala. You had al-Hassan al-Muthanna, the dual al-Hassan, because his name is Hassan as well. So the double Hassan, Hassan al-Muthanna, who survived Ashura. He married Hassan al-Muthanna, Fatima al-Kubra, the daughter of Imam al-Hussein. And he lived on and he had children and so on and so forth. Then you have, and by the way, we will discuss the nuclear family of Imam al-Mujtaba tomorrow, inshallah. But then he had lastly Al-Qasim, as we all know and love. He had 1 daughter, Salamullahi alayh, Fatima, the daughter of Imam al-Hassan. She married Imam Zainul Abidin. From her and Imam Zainul Abidin, Al-Imam Al-Humam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Baqir alayhi salam. Imam al-Baqir is the culmination, paternally, maternally, to the Ahlul Bayt. On his father's side, he has Imam al-Hussein. On his mother's side, he has Imam al-Hassan. And Imam al-Baqir is the great-grandfather of whom? Ajjalullahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, Sahib al-Asri wa zaman. Yani Imam al-Mahdi is the great-grandchild of both Imam al-Hussein and Imam al-Hassan. Alayhum as-salam. Ahlul Sunnah say only Imam al-Hassan. Why? Allah compensated you, Ya Hassan. When dunya came, you rejected it. So now Allah will give you a son who will yamlakul arda. Yamla'ul arda. Kama muli'at dhulman wa jura. And as for you, Ya Hussein, you wanted dunya. Ahlul Kufa sent you 15,000 letters. Come be the Amir. You weren't supposed to go after the dunya. As a result, the Mahdi is not from your line, and Allah had you treated that way. Wal-'ayadhu billah. That mindset brings down from the status of Sayyidul Shuhada. But you know why? In order to bring down the status of Imam al-Hassan, notice, in order to bring down the status of Imam al-Hassan, you have to bring down the status of Imam al-Hussein. They are dhurriyatan ba'dhuhum min ba'd, subhanallah. That they are together. If you want to bring down one, Imam Hussein stands in front of his brother Imam al-Hassan. If you hurt him, you've hurt Aba Abdullah. And in order to attack Imam al-Mujtaba, you have to go through his door. The city is Hassan, the gate was Hussein, like the city was Rasulullah and the gate was Ali. And the city was Hussein, and when Hassan was killed, and the gate of Hussein was Abbas salawatullahi alayh. And the amount of accusations they leveled against our Imam, you know, our Imam was not hurt a bit. He didn't care. You level these accusations, who cares? My Shia know me for who I am. Even if they are small in number, even if they might be misguided themselves, some of them will live and think, yes, this was the reality. The reality definitely is the contrary, brothers and sisters. It takes misconceptions to end up attacking the character and assassinating characters like the character of Imam al-Hassan. That was exactly how they did it and accomplished it in Karbala, by the way. Particularly, we see in the events where the family of Imam Hussein get to Sham, the entire hold of society. Sahal bin Sa'ad al-Sa'idi was a companion of the Prophet. He was going to visit Bayt al-Maqdis in Jerusalem. He's like, as I was going there, I passed by Asham, I saw the family of Hussein that I recognized, and that's Zain al-Abidin. And they're being taken in shackles and chains. And I looked to the crowd and I asked them, what's happening? Who are these people? Because I think I know them. Sahal bin Sa'ad al-Sa'idi was a companion of the Holy Prophet, a Sahabi. He's seen Hussein run around. He's seen the young Ahlul Bayt together grow up. So he's like, what's going on? They said, do not be surprised, Ya Sa'ad. إِذَا السَّمَاء انطبقت على الأرض. Don't be surprised if right now the sky collapses upon the earth. The family of Muhammad are taken captive. He said, how? He said, because of the allegations that were leveled against them. They called them Khawarij. They called them Kharijite. You attack the character of Imam al-Mujtaba one day, and you only attacked his character. Come and look at Hussein, whose character was both attacked and his self and family were both taken in shackles. And we go to the court of Sham and we see the epic sermons delivered. Then we see them sent back to the Khariba of Sham as well, the rubbish and rubble, taken in shackles there. On that night, you had that beautiful young girl, Ruqayya bint al-Hussein. She would constantly ask Imam Zayn al-Abidin, where are we? What's happening? Why are people talking to us that way? How come they stare at us that way? How come that man decided to throw that rock at you, ya Auntie Zainab? How come that guy over there couldn't help but lash his whips at you? And she's asking, she's observing. And they are just telling her that, don't worry, they're misinformed. They don't know. Allegations after allegation. This young girl, she had enough. On that night, she was laying and she was resting, tired and withered and frail. And she is next to her beloved uncle, beloved brother Zainul Abidin. And on the left, she was next to Sayyida Zainab. And she begins to whimper and mourn and cry. As Sayyida Ruqayya begins to cry. Do you know who her mother is, by the way? Ruqayya, she is the daughter of a lady known as Ishaq bint Abdullah bin Ishaq bint Talha bin Ubaidillah al-Taymi. Talha, the famous Talha and Zubair, his daughter. And she was married to Imam al-Hassan. When Imam al-Hassan died, she got married to Imam al-Hussein. From her, Ruqayya, salamullahi alayha. And so there is already that bond between her and Imam al-Hassan, salamullahi alayha. Her mother was married to both al-Hassan and al-Hussein. And now she is crying for her father, Aba Abdullah. She's crying, and all she can be told is, don't worry, they just don't know. Misunderstanding. You can't tell a 4-year-old girl that you're hated. That's the worst thing you can tell to a little girl. That you're hated, people despise us, people hate your father and family. You can't say that. How much more can she handle? So you have to say that they don't know. Then she begins to mourn and cry until in the middle of the night, Yazid wakes up from how much he is dissatisfied. And he begins to say, who keeps crying at this night? They say it's one of the daughters of Hussein. He says, what does she want? If she wants food, give her food. Just make her be quiet. He says, no, she's crying for her father, Hussein. He says, and if she wants her father, Hussein, and I right now cannot find peace, send her father, Hussein, give her and give me some peace and rest of mind. Go. And they take the head of Aba Abdullah to the Khariba of Sham. The Alawiyat and Hashimat from the daughters of Rasulullah are sitting and tired and frail. Among them Zainul Ibad. They bring the head covered in a basket, and she is crying, where is my father Hussein? And they bring the blessed basket that has the head of Aba Abdullah in front of her. And then she looks at it and begins to say, Amma Zainab, I ask you for my father Hussein. And I ask you just that request. Why did they bring me food? I did not ask for food. I just want to see my father, and I miss him. I just had that dream. I dreamt that I saw my beloved father with his hands wide open, saying, you will see me soon, my beloved Ruqayya. And I cannot take it anymore. Tell them, bring me my father. I miss him. Do not bring me this basket. They remove the covers. As soon as she sees the head of Abi Abdullah, she throws herself over the head of her father Hussein, and she begins to call out, Aba Aba man alladhi qata'a ra'as. Father, Father, who was it that severed your head? Aba Aba man alladhi aytamani ala sighari sinni. Father, Father, who was it that made me an orphan with this age? Aba Aba man alladhi khaddaba shaybatak. Father, Father, who was it that drenched your beard with your blood? In that moment, Imam Zainul Abidin looks at Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam. He begins to say to her after Ruqayya, stop crying, and the silence was met. He looked at Zainab and said, Amma Zainab, inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. For you have now lost Ruqayya in the Khariba of Al-Sham. When they brought the nurse to wash the body of a Sayyidah Ruqayya, the nurse then returned back to a Sayyidah Zainab, and she said to her, was this girl sick before she died? I cannot wash her body. Was she ill before she died? Sayyidah Zainab turned around and said, no, why do you ask? She said, then what are these blue marks all over her body? She said, those are not the marks of an illness, rather they are the marks of the whips of Shimr ibn Dhul Jawshan. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. فرج عنا يا Allah. Oh Allah, we ask you on the niece of Imam al-Hassan with her shahada today, oh Allah, to bless all of our young children, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, we ask you on the Ghariba in Sham. Brothers and sisters, we've had ulama go to Sham and they say that we looked at the dharih of Sayyidah Zainab, how large was that taboot, but then we go to Ruqayya and how small was it? It indeed is indicative of the grave of a young girl. We ask you, Ya Allah, to grant us her ziyarah in this dunya, Ya Allah. And with Allah, we ask you to grant us her shafa'ah in the akhirah, Ya Allah. Brothers and sisters, as this is the day of the shahada of Sayyidah Tahira al-Mutahhira Ruqayya bint al-Husayn, let us recite the ayat 5 times for all those who are struggling with their children, be it through health, be it through difficulty, hunger and calamity, for the Shia across the world, for the Muslim world, for the insaniya and humanity, for all their children. Every child deserves love and affection and care from wherever they may be, from whatever their family believes. Let us recite the ayat 5 times all together. لِكَشْفِ الْهُمُومِ وَالْغُمُومِ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. All together. أَمَّا يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَا وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. اللهم اكشف السوء والبلاء عنا يا الله. اللهم المرضى المنظورين شافي وعافهم يا الله. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اقضي حوائجنا وحوائج المؤمنين بحق الحسين يا الله. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والشهداء, especially those who have requested dua. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة تسبقها الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل